Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing some painting. We have a canvas, we have some paintbrushes here, and we have some paints. These are my Derivan Matisse paints. They're very nice. And of course some water and a palette and all other painting accessories. Well, those are all the painting accessories anyways, but yeah, let's get into painting trees. I've just been really in the mood to paint some trees today, so we are going to be doing that. We're actually going to be painting two different trees, two different paintings of trees, because I kind of want to see what kind of directions I can push it in and do it like two different kind of ways where they have like a complete different feel to them, but they're both still a painting of a tree. So anyways, here are my canvases, and I believe they are 12 by 16 size. You don't really need anything too fancy. I just get the pre-primed canvases and they work great. Now the first thing I want to do when I start on this first tree painting here is I want to make a nice background, and I decided on a gradient because I wanted this one to be like really pretty and soft and have some really nice colors in there in the background. So I've just blobbed down some paint here in some lines, and we've got some dark pink at the bottom and then some softer pink and a little bit of white mixed through there, and then it moves on to purple and then blue. And I'm sort of just using some horizontal motions with my large paintbrush, just sort of blend this paint in together and to try and get like a nice little rough gradient here. Now I noticed straight away that I definitely used too much paint here, so you don't need to use as much as I did. A lot of it ended up getting wiped off because I kind of went a little bit overboard, but it was actually really fun to blend out these colors here and have a nice sort of soft gradient. And it's still sort of less blended than it could be, which I actually like because I like to see those little streaks sort of intermingling together. Once that was dry, I'm going in and I'm adding a nice trunk for this tree. Now I don't want to put it front and center because I want to sort of play a little bit with the composition, and sometimes I don't like when something is right in the middle of a page or a canvas. I like to move it to the side a little bit and maybe have something else towards the other side. So that's my reasoning why it's not right in the middle. But as you can see, I have started off with a thick lumpy trunk, and then we've added some branches which are sort of coming out at the sides, and then smaller branches which are branching off from those branches. And I'm not too worried about how smooth this is going to be because trees have a lot of bark and stuff, so it's going to end up lumpy looking, but that'll actually help it to look more realistic. For the colors, I'm just using a bit of Prussian blue with a little bit of white mixed in, and I'm actually adding, as you can see, a reflection at the bottom of this tree because this tree is going to have a bit of water in front of it, and I think that that's just going to look really cool with all of these colors and the reflection of the tree, and once we have the leaves in, it's going to look really cool. Now as you can see, I've added a little bit of shadow to this tree here, and I just used a bit of black for that, and now I'm adding a little bit of highlight here. Now the Prussian blue that I added in first is still wet, so a lot of those shadows and highlights are going to naturally blend into the color there just a little bit, and that's actually what we want because we don't want any sort of crisp highlights when you start off. Now after this, I decided to add in a nice crisp highlight just on the edges of some of the branches, and I just pretty much used a white paint with a little bit of water added so that it was sort of more smooth, and then I used a really thin paintbrush just to add some little highlights to the edges and just a tiny bit of texture on some of the edges as well. You can see once I added that highlight, it looks a lot more 3D now and a lot more realistic, and it's not photorealistic or anything, but we're not really going for that today. We're just having a little bit of fun and making a pretty painting. So now that we have the tree trunk and the branches done mostly, we're actually going to go in and add in the leaves. Now I actually decided to use some really soft colors that was also in the background, and that includes pink. As you can see here, I just used a quinacridone red or magenta for that and added a little bit of white, as you can see, and I mixed up a few tones in my palette. It's actually quite convenient to do that, just to mix up a few colors that you can just have sitting there so that you can sort of mix and swap between them instead of having to like pause your painting, mix another color, paint, if that makes any sense. But anyways, for the leaves, I'm pretty much just using an angled brush, which is quite small, and I'm just adding paint to the paintbrush and then sort of doing like a downwards flick motion. And I'm trying to make sure most of the leaves are in a similar direction, and that actually helps to make it look like the leaves are maybe blowing in the wind. But we do have a few that are like sort of facing slightly different angles, and that actually helps with the realism as well and just makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. So now I've got a little bit of white on my paintbrush here, and I'm just adding some highlights here and there to the leaves to make them look more speckled and more interesting looking. We don't want just large blobs of the same color because that's not going to be very fun to look at. So we've got lots of pinks here and a little bit of white, and I've actually mixed up a darker pink color. I just used some of that quinacridone color, and then I added a very tiny amount of a dark blue to it just to have a bit more of a shadow color, and I think it looks pretty nice. Next up, I mentioned water earlier. Now we're actually using a little bit of a dry brush technique here to add some shine onto this water to make it look, you know, more watery. I'm pretty much just adding a little bit of white to my paintbrush and then wiping all of the paint off so there's only a tiny amount on there, and then just lightly brushing it over the page in the same direction to make some nice little horizontal smears, if that makes sense. And it just like catches the texture of the canvas and looks like some really nice soft highlights on the water. Now, as you can see, I'm just adding in some more petals here, and I've actually added a very small amount of orange to one of the pinks, and that's because I just want to have a slight hue shift in this painting as well in the leaves, so that they're not all the exact same hue, which is the same color but, you know, different brightnesses. I wanted a little bit of variation in there because it makes it look more interesting to look at and just more fun, as you can see. Now I'm just adding some leaves blowing in the wind, as you can see here, in all the same direction as well, so it looks like the wind is like blowing them out of the tree, and we are done. And honestly, I love this painting so much. I think it turned out really, really cute. So anyways, that's one way you can paint a tree, but let's do another. Let's do 2 trees and the next one I'm going to do one that's quite interesting. So for this painting, I decided to do it in portrait orientation instead of landscape, so that we had a little bit of variety here. Now the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to be grounding this canvas, which means I'm going to be adding just a light layer of a color, and I'm just going to paint the whole canvas with it so that there's zero white on the whole canvas. This is a really good start and a good way to begin a painting, so that like there's basically no white anywhere on the canvas. And then once you add in your painting over the top, everything's going to look nice and cohesive. And that's why I decided to do green this time, so everything has a green like hue shift to it, and it's gonna look really cool. So for this painting, you've probably seen the reference that I'm using. I am loosely looking at that reference, and I'm not like worrying too much about all of the details looking exactly the same, because I kind of want this to still be, you know, original. Even though I'm working off a reference, I don't want to just copy it directly. And at the moment, I'm just blocking out random shapes and colors, and I'm not worrying too much about any of the sort of branches or leaves or anything just yet. We're just trying to get some rough shapes here. As you can see, I've got the trunk, and there's sort of like a hint to maybe some like roots that are down below, and obviously some branches up the top, but it doesn't matter too much about how it looks because most of it is going to be covered up in the end. So now that we have that rough layer down, while the paint is still wet, I'm actually adding another layer over the top, and I'm just going in with some slightly lighter colors. As you can see here, they are still quite dark though. I mixed a lot of greens and browns together and a little bit of yellow as well, just to get the colors similar to my reference. And I'm just slowly working up the layers and fine-tuning the branches, etc. But we're still not too worried about the details. Like, look at the branches. As you can see, it's just a sort of swirl of browns and greens at the moment, but we will work them later. At the moment, I am actually adding in some white speckles in the upper portion of the painting, and this is going to be the sky which is peeking through, as you can see here. And I'm not doing it blue because in the reference that I'm looking at, the sky pretty much looks white, and that would happen because like the light is sort of peering through those leaves, and obviously the camera is like adjusted to looking at the tree, so it actually looks white, which is actually quite not something you would actually think about, because if I was going to paint this without looking at any references, I probably would have added blue to the sky area. But that's something to think about too. Like, really look at your references and look at the colors and the tones that are in the actual image, because it's not actually going to be exactly what you think it is. So anyways, I added a lot of white speckles to that area, and then I blended out slightly with a dry brush, just a little bit. And now I'm adding in a little bit more green here because I do want a lot of variation. I want more yellows and bright colors on the left side, and then slightly more greens and slightly dark colors on the right side. And I'm just roughly going over the whole area of the sky / leaf area, and I'm just like alternating between adding more white, adding more green, adding some yellow, as you can see here, because there are quite a few yellow tones in the highlights of the page. And honestly, I'm just sort of trying to get it to look as close to my reference as I can, and I'm just using a small paintbrush to just do like a slight dabbing motion, and then yeah. While we leave that to dry, let's move on to some shadows. So we're going to go over this trunk here, and we have a lot of like soft swirly patterns, but we really want to refine them and like push them into like crisper detail, if that makes sense. So I'm just adding a little bit of Prussian blue here, as well as a little bit of burnt umber, I believe it is, just a really dark blue and a really dark brown, and we are just putting those in the areas where we think that the darkest shadows are in the roots. Try to pay attention to where you want the roots of the tree to curl around, and then once that is dry, I'm actually going over the top here and then just adding a subtle highlight to these roots to refine them further. Now, I did wait till this was dry so that I could do a rough sort of dry brush technique to shade the highlights, because I just really enjoy that sort of dry brush technique. But yeah, as you can see, as soon as I start adding more levels of highlights and shadows and just slowly refining it, it's starting to come together really nicely, and I think it's actually looking a lot more like a tree now than it did just a little bit earlier. For the colors of these trunks, I did mix a lot of browns as well as a little bit of orange with some of the greens to get that more like earthy kind of green tone. And I really want it to be nice and warm, as you can see, but also like dark and almost mossy looking, with something sort of natural like this tree with like really sort of dark lighting. You really want to sort of muddy up those tones, and you don't really want to use like too many colors straight out of the tube unless they're like specific olive greens or anything like that. So now, while I'm waiting for those roots to dry, I'm actually going to move back up to the top portion of the painting here, and I've mixed a little bit of a dark green with a little bit of water, and I'm using a sort of pointier paintbrush here to try and get some really nice thin crisp lines. And we are going to refine these branches a little bit, and just like in the last painting, I am just doing a squiggly line, and then I make that squiggly line sort of fork out into two squiggly lines, and then like maybe one of those will fork out to another two, and then we'll end up with a natural looking branch, if that makes sense. Once that is done, the roots at the bottom here are mostly dry, and I'm just going to start with some highlights here, and I've just mixed a little bit of like yellow with a bit of green, and then like a little bit of of the previous green with that, so that it is a similar shade but a little bit brighter and a little bit lighter. And I'm just doing that exact same dry brushing, like sort of blending technique as I did last time, but I'm just a little bit more careful with where I place those highlights because I don't want to cover up all of the blending that I did last time. I just want to add some more highlights over the top, if that makes sense. And yeah, with the more layers you do, the more realistic this will start to look, especially when you add more shadows like over the top in the darkest areas. For a little bit of extra realism, I'm just adding some more leaves over the top of some of the branches so that they are partially covered up. So, you know, you don't see every single branch when you draw a tree. Some of those leaves are obviously going to be on those branches. So it makes sense that there's layers and layers of leaves, if that makes sense. After this, I'm just adding a little bit more texture to those roots just so that it looks a little bit more interesting. And here it is. And honestly, I really love this painting. I think it looks really nice and majestic, and it has a really nice sort of tone to it. So yeah, that's two ways that you can paint a tree, and I think that they both look very, very different, but they are both very cool, and I can't decide which one of these I actually like better. I think I like them both the same. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you found it informative. Please let me know in the comments below if I helped you to paint a tree. Maybe you could tag me on Twitter or something and show me that, because I would absolutely love that. I hope you're all having a lovely day. Please stay safe out there, and I shall see you in my next video. Bye everyone.